Letter to the Reverend Dr. Conyers Middleton by John Wesley, Part 6, 5. 1. The last thing you proposed was to refute some of the most plausible objections which have been hitherto made. To what you have offered on this head, I must likewise attempt a short reply. You say, it is objected first that by the character I have given of the fathers, the authority of the books of the New Testament, which were transmitted to us through their hands, will be rendered precarious and uncertain, page 190. After a feint of confuting it, you frankly acknowledge the whole of this objection. I may adventure, you say, to declare that if this objection be true, it cannot hurt my argument. For if it be natural and necessary that the craft and credulity of witnesses should always detract from the credit of their testimony, then who can help it? And if this charge be proved on the fathers, it must be admitted, how far soever the consequences may reach, page 192. If it be proved, very true. If that charge against the Father were really and substantially proved, the authority of the New Testament would be at an end so far as it depends on one kind of evidence. But that charge is not proved. Therefore, even the traditional authority of the New Testament is as firm as ever. Commentary. The problem that Conyers Middleton has run into in attacking the ante-Nicene fathers for believing in charismatic and miraculous gifts, for calling them fools or deceivers or liars, in attacking their credibility, Conyers Middleton, as a church leader, has run into the problem of attacking all of their activities that they ever accomplished in all of their lives and ministries, one of which was the canonization of the New Testament. And so here lies the real big problem of attacking the ante-Nicene fathers. Okay, you can't be a good Protestant without the 66 books of the Bible. However, the 66 books of the Holy Bible were filtered out and sorted out by the ante-Nicene church fathers and finally approved by Augustine. Now, the final list, I believe, was compiled by Irenaeus. So I'm going to look this up. Canonization of the New Testament. Looking this up. The 27 books were canonized at the Council of Hippo in the year 393 AD. That's Augustine of Hippo. He was the one who finally did it. But the process before that was something like a 250-year process. The ante-Nicene fathers were the guys who sorted this stuff out, debated through it, through various councils and through various writings. So the men who were truly involved with that process, I believe it's been a while. It's been about 20 years since I've studied this. I believe it was Irenaeus. Yes. I'm looking at the Development of New Testament Canon article on Wikipedia. Irenaeus, who died in 202 AD, quotes and cites 21 books that would end up as part of the New Testament, but he did not canonize Philemon, Hebrews, James, 2 Peter, 3 John, and Jude. The Muratorian fragment. Okay, let's see here. I'm just reading through this. So Irenaeus is the one who got it started. He's the one who got the ball rolling towards the 27 books that we have today. Okay. And as we've seen, Irenaeus was a big charismatic. And he was also a very organized theologian. He wrote a book called Against Heresies, which has like 5 parts in it. And he was a very systematic theologian. So the man could think. The man was orderly. And most of the New Testament books that we got today, he hand selected. So to attack him as either a liar or a fool, because he was charismatic, is to attack the selection of the New Testament books that we have today, because he was responsible for it. So, Middleton, your argument's kind of shot. All you got now is naturalistic reductionism to lean on, which is what you've been leaning on the whole time, if you were to be perfectly honest. Okay, let's continue. 2. Uh, It is objected, you say, secondly, that all suspicion of fraud in the case of the primitive miracles is excluded by that public appeal and challenge which the Christian apologists make to their enemies, the heathens, to come and see with their own eyes the reality of the facts which they attest. Page 193. You answer, this objection has no real weight with any who are acquainted with the condition of the Christians in those days. You then enlarge, as it seems, with a peculiar pleasure on the general contempt and odium they lay under from the first appearance of Christianity in the world till it was established by the civil power. Pages 194 to 196. In these circumstances, it cannot be imagined, you say, that men of figure and fortune would pay any attention to the apologies or writings of a sect so utterly despised. Page 197. But, sir, they were hated as well as despised, and that by the great vulgar as well as the small. And this very hatred would naturally prompt them to examine the ground of the challenges daily repeated by them they hated. Were it only that, by discovering the fraud, which they wanted neither opportunity nor skill to do, had there been any, they might have had a better presence for throwing the Christians to the lions, than because the Nile did not, or the Tiber did not overflow. 3. You add, much less can we believe that the Emperor or Senate of Rome should take any notice of those apologies, or even know, indeed, that any such were addressed to them. Why, sir, by your account, you would make us believe that all the emperors and senate together were as senseless, stupid a race of blockheads and brutes as even the Christians themselves. But hold, you are going to prove it too, for, say you, should the like case happen now, that any Methodist, Moravian, or French prophet, right skillfully put together, should publish an apology for his brethren addressed to the king in Parliament, is it not wholly improbable that the government would pay any regard to it? You should add, to make the parallel complete, or know that any such was addressed to them. No, I conceive the improbability supposed lies wholly on the other side. Whatever the government of heathen Rome was, which I presume you will not depreciate, the government of England is remarkable for tenderness to the very meanest subject. It is, therefore, not improbable in the least that an address from some thousands of those subjects, how contemptible soever they were generally esteemed, would not be totally disregarded by such a government, but that they should not know that any such had been addressed to them is not only improbable but morally impossible. If, therefore, it were possible for the heathens to have a worse opinion of the ancient Christians than we, you say, have our modern fanatics, still it is utterly incredible that the Roman government should not only take no notice of their apologies, but not even know that any such were addressed to them. Commentary. A couple thoughts to be shared here. Number one, um, Middleton and Wesley are debating about whether or not, say, Against Heresies by Irenaeus was ever mailed to the emperor to be read. And Middleton is basically saying the Christian denomination was such a small force in society that the emperor probably never had the time to read Against Heresies by Irenaeus. And Wesley said, why wouldn't he? I mean, it was addressed to them. Several of their letters were, so why wouldn't they read those things so that they could realize that they were not criminals but meant well? Okay, interesting statement here. He actually names the names of the charismatic groups that he's targeting: Methodists, Moravians, and French prophets. Those were the three charismatic groups that he had in mind. But I'm surprised he didn't say Society of Friends Quakers, because they were another group. And I'm also surprised he didn't say Covenanters, although by the 1750, the Covenanters might have well died out by then. But yeah, I mean, this was mainly targeted against these three charismatic groups in London: the Methodists, the Moravians, and the French prophets. All of them were contemporaries. All of them were charismatics, different charismatic groups. And it's interesting how, you know, the top cessationists names the names of the people, the charismatics that he's writing against, much like Charismatic Chaos by John MacArthur and Strange Fire by John MacArthur is addressed to basically John Wimber in the Vineyard, in the first case, and Bill Johnson and the New Apostolic Reformation in the second case. And Wesley's here responding to the cessationist accusations, and just like John Wimber and Jack Deere responded to the accusations of John MacArthur. Same pattern, history repeating itself here. Church history repeating itself. 4. But the publishing, but the publishing of books, but the publishing books was more expensive than it is now, and therefore we cannot think the Christians of those days were able to provide such a number of them as was sufficient for the information of the public. Pages 198 to 199. Nay, if they were not able to provide themselves food and raiment, they would be sure to provide a sufficient number of these, sufficient at least for the information of the emperor and senate to whom those apologies were addressed. And how great a number, do you suppose, might suffice for them? How many hundred or thousand copies I apprehend the emperor would be content with one, and one more would be needful for the senate. Now, I really believe the Christians of those days were able to provide both these copies, nay, and even two more, if it should have fallen out that 2 or 3 emperors were on the throne, even though we should suppose that in Tertullian's time there were but 40,000 of them in all Rome. 5. However you plunge on, since then the Christians were not able to bear the expense of copying them, whether the heathens were disposed to buy them or no is at present out of the question. There is great reason to believe that their apologies, how gravely soever addressed to emperors and senates, lay unknown for many years. There is no great reason to believe it from anything you have advanced yet. You add, especially when the publishing of them was not only expensive, but so criminal also as to expose them often to danger and even to capital punishment. In very deed, sir, I am sometimes inclined to suspect that you are yourself related to certain ancient fathers, notwithstanding the learned quotations which adorn your margin, who used to say, Gratium est non potest leg. You lay me under an almost invincible temptation to think so upon this very occasion. For what could induce you, if you knew what he said, to place at the bottom of this very page a passage from one of those apologists, Justin Martyr, who so clearly confutes your own argument? The words are, although death be determined against those who teach or even confess the name of Christ, we both embrace and teach it everywhere. And if you also receive these words as enemies, you can do no more than kill us. Could danger then, or the fear of capital punishment, restrain those Christians from presenting these apologies? No. Capital punishment was no terror to them, who daily offered themselves to the flames till the very heathen butchers themselves were tired of slaughtering them. There can, therefore, no shadow of doubt remain with any cool and impartial man, but that these apologies were presented to the most eminent heathens, to the magistrates, the senate, the emperors. Nor consequently is there the least room to doubt of the truth of the facts therein asserted, seeing the apologists constantly desired their enemies to come and see them with their own eyes, and hazard which those crafty men, quote unquote, as you said, would never have run had not the facts themselves been infallibly certain. This objection then stands against you in full force, for such a public appeal to their bitterest enemies must exclude all reasonable suspicion of fraud in the case of the primitive miracles. Commentary. Wesley believes that the writings of the church fathers were copied and circulated and sent and mailed to the leaders of the Roman Empire. And in these letters and in these theological writings, there were even invitations for representatives of the Senate, representatives of the Roman government to attend charismatic church services and observe the miracles with their own eyes. Wesley is saying because they did this, they were very confident that the miracles going on in their church services were not fake, but real. 6. You tell us it is objected thirdly that no suspicion of fraud can reasonably be entertained against those who expose themselves even to martyrdom in confirmation of the truth of what they taught. In order to invalidate this objection, you assert that some of the primitive Christians might expose themselves to martyrdom out of mere obstinacy, others from a desire of glory, others from a fear of reproach, but the most of all from the hope of a higher reward in heaven, especially as they believed the end of the world was near and that the martyrs felt no pain in death. All which topics, you say, when displayed with art, were sufficient to inflame the multitude to embrace any martyrdom. Pages 200 to 204 and 208. This appears very plausible in speculation, but fact and experience will not answer. You are an eloquent man and are able to display any topic you please with art enough. Yet, if you was to try with all that art and eloquence to persuade by all these topics, not an whole multitude, but one simple, credulous plowman, to go and be shot through the head, I am afraid you would scarce prevail with him, after all, to embrace even that easy martyrdom. And it might be more difficult still to find a man who, either out of obstinacy, fear of shame, or desire of glory, would calmly and deliberately offer himself to be roasted alive in Smithfield. Commentary. Wesley's saying, well, first off, Middleton said, yeah, this idea that, the martyrs died for the truth and died for the miracles and the truth of them and all these things were, they were dying for. Yeah, that's not necessarily true because here comes natural explanation. People out of pride or being mule-headed or stubborn or, or being afraid of, peer pressure in the church, all this kind of stuff. They could have been martyred for those reasons. And Wesley's like, yeah, that's kind of stupid, honestly. I mean, think about it. Is there anybody around today that you could just go and say, hey, go and get shot through the head? Or maybe find another guy and be like, hey, are you stubborn enough? Do you desire glory enough to be roasted alive in front of everybody? That's what Wesley said. What a morbid joke. Okay. But seriously, no, nobody wants to be martyred. Are you kidding? Everybody wants to stay alive and live a long life, have a family, right? 7. Have you considered, sir, how the case stood in our own country scarce 200 years ago? Not a multitude indeed, and yet not a few of our own countrymen then expired in the flames. He's talking about the time of Fox's Book of Martyrs. And it was not a general persuasion among them that the martyrs feel no pain in death. That these have feeling as well as other men plainly appeared in the case of Bishop Ridley, crying out, I cannot burn, I cannot burn, when his lower parts were consumed. Do you think the fear of shame or the desire of praise was the motive on which these acted? Or have you reason to believe it was mere obstinacy that hindered them from accepting deliverance? Sir, since human nature has always been the same, so that our experience of what now passes in our own soul will be the best comment on what is delivered to us concerning others, let me entreat you to make the case your own. You must not say, I am not one of the ignorant vulgar. I am a man of sense and learning. So were many of them, not inferior even to you, either in natural or acquired endowments. I ask then, would any of these motives suffice to induce you to burn at a stake? I beseech you, lay your hand on your heart and answer between God and your own soul. What motive could incite you to walk into a fire, but in hope full of immortality? When you mention this motive, you speak to the point. And yet, even with regard to this, both you and I should find, did it come to a trial, that the hope of a fool or the hope of an hypocrite would stand us in no stead. We should find nothing else would sustain us in that hour but a well-grounded confidence of a better resurrection, nothing less than the steadfastly looking up to heaven and beholding the glory which shall be revealed. Commentary. Wesley is saying, when all the excuses and all the reasons have been annihilated, there's only one thing that could sustain a martyr who has a free will choice to get out of the situation he's in. Genuine witness of the Holy Spirit, genuine faith in the gospel is the only thing that can pull a martyr through that. 8. But heretics, you say, have been martyrs. I will answer more particularly when you specify who and when. I may suffice to say now, whosoever he be, that rather than he will offend God, calmly and deliberately chooses to suffer death, I cannot likely speak evil of him. But Cyprian says, some who have suffered tortures for Christ, yet afterwards fell into gross open sin. It may be so, but it is nothing to the question. It does not prove in the least what you brought it to prove, namely, that bad men have endured martyrdom. Do not evade, sir, and say, yes, torments are a kind of martyrdom. True, but not the martyrdom of which we speak. 9. You salve all at last by declaring gravely, it is not my design to detract in any manner from the just praise of those primitive martyrs who sustained the cause of Christ at the expense of their lives. Page 112. No, who could ever suppose it was? Who could ever suppose it was? Who could imagine it was your design to detract from the just praise of Justin, Irenaeus, or Cyprian? You only designed to show what their just praise was, namely, the praise of pickpockets, of common cheats and impostors. We understand your meaning, therefore, when you add, it is reasonable to believe that they were the best sort of Christians and the chief ornaments of the church in their several ages. Page 213. Wesley's being extremely sarcastic to Middleton, who's speaking out of two sides of his mouth. Middleton can't escape the fact that Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, and St. Cyprian all sacrificed their lives for the cause of the gospel. But at the same time, they were charismatics. And so he accuses them of being pickpockets, common cheats, and imposters, like those, people on TBN, fake miracle workers and cheats and things like this. They died for the gospel, so that's a tough point for him. But he attacks them on one hand, and then he praises them in another. 10. You conclude my view is to show that their martyrdom does not add adding weight to their testimony. Whether it does or no, it gives the strongest proof, as you yourself affirm, of the sincerity of their faith, and consequently proves that no suspicion of fraud can reasonably be entertained against them. But this, which you seem to have quite forgot, was the whole of the objection, and consequently this as well as both the former objections remain in their full force. Commentary. You need to understand something about martyrdom in the Roman Empire. People were not dragged against their will and martyred against their will. Only criminals were. The Christians were always given a chance to get out of martyrdom. All they had to say was Caesar is Lord. That's all they needed to say. Say Caesar is Lord and you will be set free. There was no martyrs that were martyred against their will. It was always a free will martyrdom every time. Got to understand that. It was a free will martyrdom every time. As long as you said Caesar is Lord, they would set you free. But these people believed in the gospel so much that they refused to say that and only proclaimed Jesus as Lord. Caesar was not God to them. And that is the issue. All right. They refused to acknowledge the deity of Caesar and only clung to the deity of Christ and the gospel and the truth of their testimony. Therefore, all of their statements about the miracles of the Holy Spirit go with them through the flames of martyrdom as well. They're not recanting these statements as they're passing through those flames, as they're being eaten by lions and bears, and being tortured in hundreds of other ways to death. 11. It has been objected, fourthly, you say, that you destroy the faith and credit of all history, page 114. But this objection you affirm, when seriously considered, will appear to have no sense at all in it, page 215. That we will try, and one passage home to the point is as good as 1,000. Now, sir, be pleased to look back. In your preface, page 9, I read these words. The credibility of facts lies open to the trial of our reason and senses. But the credibility of witnesses depends on a variety of principles wholly concealed from us. And though in many cases it may reasonably be presumed, yet in none can it certainly be known. If this be as you assert, I repeat it again, then farewell the credit of all history. Sir, this is not the cant of zealots. You must not escape so. It is plain, sober reason. If the credibility of witnesses, of all witnesses, for you make no distinction, depends, as you peremptorily affirm, on a variety of principles wholly concealed from us, and consequently, though it may be presumed in many cases, it can be certainly known in none, then it is plain all history, sacred or profane, is utterly precarious and uncertain. Then I may indeed presume, but I cannot certainly know, that Julius Caesar was killed in the Senate House. Then I cannot certainly know if there was an emperor in Germany called Charles V, that Leo X ever sat in the See of Rome, or Louis XIV on the throne of France. Now, let any man of common understanding judge whether this objection has any sense in it or no. Commentary. Skepticism is, unreasonable skepticism versus a healthy dose of skepticism. As I was talking before in another podcast, you can only use it so much. Otherwise, if you keep on questioning, you can never have certainty about anything. You can't even have certainty about historical facts. 12. Under this same head you fall again upon the case of witchcraft, and say, there is not in all history any one miraculous fact so authentically attested as the existence of witches. All Christian, yea, and all heathen nations whatsoever have consented in the belief of them. Now to deny the reality of facts, so solemnly attested, and so universally believed, seems to give the lie to the sense and experience of all Christendom, to the wisest and best of every nation, and to public monuments subsisting in our own times. Page 221. What obliges you, then, to deny it? You answer, the incredibility of the thing. Page 223. Oh, sir, never strain at the incredibility of this, after you have swallowed 100 people talking without tongues. 13. What you aim at in this also is plain, as well as in your account of the Abbé de Paris. The point of your argument is, if you cannot believe these, then you ought not to believe the Bible. The incredibility of the things related ought to overrule all testimony whatsoever. Your argument at length would run thus. If things be incredible in themselves, then this incredibility ought to overrule all testimony concerning them. But the gospel miracles are incredible in themselves. Sir, that proposition I deny. You have not proved it yet. You have only now and then, as it were by and by, made any attempt to prove it. And, till this is done, you have done nothing with all the other that you have made. 14. You reserve the home stroke for the last. You reserve the home stroke for the last. There is hardly a miracle said to be wrought in the primitive times, but what is said to be performed in our days. But all these modern pretensions we ascribe to their true cause, the craft of a few playing upon the credulity of the many for private interest. When, therefore, we read of the same things done by the ancients and for the same ends, of acquiring wealth, credit, or power, how can we possibly hesitate to impute them to the same cause of fraud and imposture? Page 230. The reason of our hesitation is this: they did not answer the same ends. The modern clergy of Rome do acquire credit and wealth by their pretended miracles, but the ancient clergy acquired nothing by their miracles, but to be afflicted, destitute, tormented. The one gained all things thereby, the others lost all things. And this we think makes some difference. Even unto this present hour, says one of them, writing to those who could easily confute him if he spoke not the truth, we both hunger and thirst, and are naked, and are buffeted, and have no certain dwelling place. Being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we suffer it. Being defamed, we entreat. We are become as the filth of the world, as the offscouring of all things unto this day. 1 Corinthians 4:11-13. Now, sir, whatever be thought of the others, we apprehend such clergy as these, laboring thus unto the death for such credit and wealth, are not chargeable with fraud and imposture. Commentary. Charismatics of the early church, even the church leaders, were subjected to all sorts of poverty, sickness, suffering, persecution, and starvation. And you might reasonably draw the conclusion that every charismatic and every Pentecostal at some point in their lives goes through the same thing. For the longest time, Methodists, holiness people, and Pentecostals kind of have a grapes of wrath sort of theme that they go through, where there's a lot of poverty associated. There's just poor hillbillies, dirty hillbillies, speaking in tongues up there. And then, of course, some sort of a prosperity gospel emerged out of that in the 50s to lift them up, sort of a rags to riches concept. But why was it needed? Because of the poverty. Why do charismatics tend to be poor at some point in their lives? Because the charismatic experiences are supposed to sustain them through it and lift them up. There's a reason for everything. Whether it's violent persecution or extreme poverty and persecution you're going through. The charismatic experiences are there to increase your faith and to comfort you through the hardships, the trials, and the tribulations. God bless you out there. This is John with wesleygospel.com.